On this edition of Being Well, Cheri Burcham from the University of Illinois Extension is here to talk about caregiving relationships. Cheri will address the challenges and rewards of providing care for your loved one. That's all coming up next, so don't go away. Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston. Hello and thanks for joining us for Being Well. Today we're talking about caregiving relationships with Cheri Burcham, Extension Educator with the University of Illinois Extension.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming by. Let's talk about how many people in the U.S. are now doing caregiving in their home.
Well, the numbers have steadily been rising over the past few years. We're now at about 43.5 million people are caring for someone over the age of 50 in their homes or in that person's home as well.
So what accounts for the increase in people doing this?
It looks like it's probably all the baby boomers that are now getting into that older adult category and that huge influx. But I think that the highest increase we're seeing is the age of 80 and more. All of us are aging, so I think that's what it is.
And it seems like we're going back to an earlier time where mom and dad would move back in with the adult children, and you just had this larger extended family, which actually can have some benefits. There's some good things to having someone else in the home.
Definitely. You get the multiple generations together. Caregiving has its benefits. You have that you can develop relationships if you weren't ever very close, but now you have that chance to be, you have that chance to learn from each other, learn things about them that maybe you didn't know about, that wasn't discussed years ago. I think it's always good when you can mix the children with the older adults, because with our busy world, when they're all well, I don't think you see that as much because everybody's got their schedules. But you know, if there is an upside to having an illness and having to have care, that, you know, being around them and being able to teach them things and be around them is a good thing. Well,
this is a topic that you actually give presentations to for people in the community. Yes. So when you're doing that, what are some of the recommendations that you give to people when they're considering doing caregiving in their home? What are some things people need to think about before they really launch into this?
Dive in, okay. Well, one thing they really need to consider is, you know, whether they're emotionally ready to do this. Some people, they feel obligated, and I say if it's just obligation, you really need to rethink, because you know, considerations are your schedule. I mean, are you really realistically going to be able to take care of them and put dinner on the table? You know, can you give up work? Is it something that, you know, that's an issue? You need to consider what, you know, all of the practical things, like, will they be living in their home? Is that something you can do, is to come and help them there, or are they moving into yours, and is your home set up for them? You just have to really try to take the feelings out of it and be more realistic about, can this be done?
So how should, on the flip side of that, how should someone approach maybe their parent about the need for, maybe mom or dad, we think you need more care, because that is a sensitive subject.
It is. It's very sensitive, because you get some older adults that they're very independent. I mean, everybody, that's your main thing, is your independence, and they, like you said, it's very sensitive. I think the best way to approach it is, you know, look, mom and dad, I want you to be able to live on your own as long as possible, and to have that happen, this and this and this has to be done, you know, because if it isn't, then we're looking at nursing home care or assisted living and that. And most older adults want more than anything to just be in their own home because that's where they're comfortable, that's what they're used to. So I think that just to make it very important and upfront to them that for this to happen, we have to set up this care and get them talking about it as early as possible. It's really hard to get them to talk about it before they need it.
Right.
And so I also have lessons with older adults themselves, encouraging them to have those conversations with their kids because they just don't think like you wouldn't think about what would you need for care, I mean, at this point. And they're kind of the same way. And so we have to have those lines of communication open to talk about it.
Are there certain signs that people are, you know, like kids should look out for as they're looking at mom and dad aging, you know, maybe indicators that, you know, maybe it's time they may need some additional care?
Certainly, you know, their mobility is a huge issue. Just making, you know, watching out if they're having frequent falls. Their vision is a major issue also. Kind of watching those types of things, and are they making mistakes in their financial business? You know, are they is the bank calling saying, you know, mom's bouncing checks now, what's going on with that? Just kind of keeping tabs on them that way. And if you see any discrepancies or any things that are unusual for them, you know, maybe then kind of sometimes you can get a case manager in to kind of assess and see, you know, and maybe give you a better idea. Sometimes bringing someone from the outside is a very good thing.
I was going to say, sometimes an outsider can actually be helpful than the child bringing this up to mom or dad.
Yeah, because, you know, even though you're an adult and responsible, you're always going to be their child. So it's hard sometimes coming from you. And so if you get that third party professional person to come in and not, you know, just to say, look, mom and dad, I'm going to have them come in and see if there's any help that we can get. They can do the assessment, and it does, coming from them, they're going to listen, I think, a little bit more.
What recommendations would you have if someone decides they're going to move mom or dad into their home? You had spoke earlier about maybe needing to do an assessment of your home to make sure that it's a good environment for someone who is elderly. What sort of things should they consider about having to make changes in their home?
Well, if you're moving them into yours, probably first and foremost, and this isn't even a practical issue, but if you have children, you know, you have to consider, okay, what are the older person's, what are their ailments? You know, is it a mental issue? Is it physical? And, you know, how is that going to place any burden or any inconvenience on the other members of the family? That's one thing. You know, we think about the practical things like, okay, are your doorways wide enough? Okay, get rid of the throw rugs so they don't fall. Make sure everything's visible so they don't trip on things. Railings, and you know, in the bathroom, and in, you know, things such as that. But I think it's even more important to consider everybody's comfort level, and is there room, and is it going to cause a disruption or an issue in the family?
And do you recommend that this is a family decision, especially if there are children in the home, that the whole family gets in and talks about this? What do you think about having grandma come and live with us permanently? Because it does have an effect on everybody. Yeah,
I think that anytime you give a person a say in the decision making, whether it be a child or I definitely think you must include the care receiver, the older adult themselves. Planning around them is such a bad idea that they need to be involved in that. Maybe they don't want to come there, you know?
Right.
And so getting everybody's say on the situation, even if in the end, you know, you're not going to be able to honor that or whatever, at least they feel like they've had a part in that decision-making process.
So as you've talked to people who are going through this, what do they say are some of the most common challenges that they face about caregiving?
You know, there's so many for a caregiver. There can be, anyway, there can be, depending on how much care you're really asked to provide and how often. Definitely one that comes up a lot is the respite and the break time. Because if you have someone that's having to give, 24/7 care, and they're looking for a break, and it can be hard to find resources out there to, give them time off to do some things they need to do. There are just so many challenges. I have this little thing that
dominoes.
The domino effect is what it's called. And a big challenge, I think the biggest challenge for caregivers, especially, if they're related, if it's their parents or someone they're close to, is all of the difficult feelings that they have with the situation. And when I do my sessions with people, I talk about this domino effect, and I say, there's a whole lot of things to consider. What if you're having feelings of resentment because you don't want to have to be put in this place, and you're missing out on things, but you're doing it because you're helping. And what if you have to quit your job because you can't afford for someone to come in? It's got to be you. So you've given up that identity, that job that you're doing. What if the care receiver is not very cooperative? Sometimes they're not overly cooperative or overly happy that you are, helping them. And maybe the doctors, maybe you're having trouble getting through with the doctors. Oh gosh, maybe Medicaid, Medicare, all that healthcare stuff, that's a whole nother job, trying to get through the paperwork and things like that. Maybe you're having trouble just physically maneuvering them and getting them where they need to be, and it's getting more difficult. Maybe your family isn't very helpful. Maybe you have siblings, and this can happen, that they're available, but they're not. They're here, but they're not hands-on. So you've got all these things lined up, and maybe you could handle each of those things as they go, but then one extra little thing happens, and it's just, you burn out, burnout and stress, and and you just feel like you want to throw it all out. And so that, I think, is the biggest challenge, is a lot of all those things and those feelings of, you're angry about your situation, you're fearful because you don't know what to expect from day to day, and you feel guilty too because you got angry, and because you feel like, I shouldn't be this way, I should be happy to do this.
You mentioned siblings, so maybe you're the caregiver, dad is living with you, and you have a sibling or two. How should one bring those into the mix, especially if you have an expectation that they should be also helping with this? How do you address that? Because that's a whole other communication challenge sometimes.
That's when, at the very beginning, when we talked about that whole, can you realistically do this, when you're considering it, that's when you should be bringing in the whole family, the people that you think might be pitching in because they should, because they're right there. And you're putting them there and asking, what can you do? Because, we can't assume. We can't assume that the sister's going to help and this one's going to take them for the weekends. And, we have to get it down. Okay, I want to know because we're considering doing this care. Now, does it happen where they say they're going to help and then they don't?
Right.
Yes, yes. And there's one of those frustrations there, that happens. And we can't ever force them to do what they're not going to do. So, but to ask, because sometimes I think that I've heard caregivers in the past say, well, they won't do this and they won't do that. And I'll say, well, did you ask them? Well, no, but they should. They should know better. And it's like, but sometimes people don't. Sometimes they're standing on the sideline thinking, well, maybe you don't want help. So they just need that ask. Now, maybe they will tell you no, but at least you can know. I mean, you can't know until you ask and say, look, this would be so helpful to me if you did this, this, and this. It would help me care for mom better if you would.
Well, and have you found that if it's the person giving the care, that maybe the sibling thinks, well, they're kind of in charge of it.
Yes.
I shouldn't really say anything. Or, as you said, it seems like a lot of it is assumptions.
Yes.
Get us in trouble. Yes.
Yeah, that communication communication, I can't emphasize more at this point in their lives to keep it open. And that's with those siblings, that's with the care receiver, that's with the doctors and the healthcare professionals, that you have to have a transparent thing going on and to speak very clearly about what you want and what you need, and to listen, very carefully about, listen to what they're saying, and to go ahead, and that third thing mostly is defining, like making sure that you heard correctly. And you've probably heard this with communication. It's, okay, am I hearing you say that you can't take care of mom on the weekends, or is this what I'm hearing you say? And clarifying those things. So it just, you can't assume.
So you had talked about when the dominoes all fall, we're in stress mode. What sort of advice can you give if someone's out there watching and saying, I'm in that situation and I've about had it and it's very stressful for me? What advice do you have to ease some of that stress?
For one thing, if someone is caregiving and they haven't met with a caregiver advisor, and I know you've had her on the show before from this county, but every county in Illinois has a caregiver advisor, designated by the Department on Aging. And they are a wonderful resource to be able to hook you up to respite care and in-home care, like to come in and supplement. That's one thing. Especially if it's a spouse taking care of, a person taking care of their spouse. A lot of times that situation, they feel like they have to be the only one and do it all because it's their duty. And sometimes it can be hard to convince them. It's like, you can accept other help. You need to take a break. And that's the biggest thing with caregivers, is that's the last thing on their list, is to take care of themselves. And then you see that whole burnout crisis thing. So my advice would be to contact a caregiver advisor, see what's out there, see what additional resources can help you. Definitely step away and take a break. And it doesn't mean that it has to be a vacation, even though that would be nice, especially if they're doing 24/7 care. But just like, going out for walks, going to meet with friends, because so many times they sever all of their social obligations or social outings to take care of their loved one, and they give that up, and they shouldn't have to. They need that socialization with somebody else. So being able to talk to others about their situation and get that out. If it can't be friends, maybe it's a counselor, somebody that they can talk with.
So there are resources out there that people can seek out. At what point, somewhere along the line, for some people, you may no longer be able to provide the level of care that person needs in the home. What would be some indicators that maybe mom or dad needs to move on to more of an assisted living or a nursing facility, or even hospice or hospital care?
I think a big one that I notice more, is just the physical ability to handle a person. I think that's when a lot of them, if they have a physical impairment, and it gets to the point where, I don't care if you're only 100 pounds, if you're not able to get up on your own or help assist getting up, it's very difficult for someone to lift you. And I know that that's many times been the reason why someone has had to move on to another level of care, because they simply can't physically handle that person. If they have mental deficiency, dementia, Alzheimer's, that's a whole safety issue. Can you watch them, supervise them 24 hours a day? If you cannot, are they safe to be home alone? Can you get somebody else in there to watch them? If you're not able to, for whatever reason, they need to be somewhere where they can be supervised. Because that would just be the worst, to have to leave them and then something would happen. So that's the kind of things you got to think about. I had a woman once that was like, well, mom's home alone, and she tries to cook, the whole cooking thing.
Cook, yes.
And I can't prevent her from doing that. And, and I'm like, that's a huge safety issue. If that's any question at all, you've got to do something.
Let's move into, unfortunately, at a certain point, people are going to go from caregiver to they're dealing with grief and loss, and you've had this person in your home for maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years, and now they're gone. Mm-hmm. That's a very difficult transition. What advice do you have for someone who may be at that stage of the caregiving?
Of course, when they're caregiving, I believe a lot of caregivers already kind of go through stages of grief, mm-hmm. because there's so many losses as they go, and sometimes, especially if a person has dementia and they're not themselves, mm-hmm. it's almost like they've grieved ahead, but for the person that's not there. And so then when they pass away, it's not a relief, but it's not as traumatic because they've kind of already grieved. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's definitely, I think that the thing that they have to remind themselves is that they did what they could, and they were there for them, mm-hmm. and they sought the very best care that they could have for them at that time. And then it's kind of like any other grieving process. If they went through hospice is amazing with grief support, mm-hmm. groups that they have for the family. They follow them up to like a year or two after. So, but you're right. I mean, sometimes that becomes their whole world, and then when that person's gone,
and then you got to transition into a new.
Then what? And that's why I said about trying to keep your social contacts mm-hmm. alive, because eventually, yes, caregiving is that road that the end of it is they're going to be gone, mm-hmm. and then where are you left?
Right.
So you have to keep your life going, and we say that caregivers shouldn't just strive to survive. They should strive to thrive, mm-hmm. because they shouldn't put their life on hold, because when that's over, they need to have that support, and they need to have that. But mm-hmm. So I'd say they just need to seek out their social supports and their friends, and look for other avenues of mm-hmm. things to do.
Well, in this last minute or two, we want to talk though about the benefits of caregiving, because there are some very positive aspects to bringing mom or dad into the home.
Yeah.
And I want you to end on that positive note.
Yeah, that's as I do in my presentations with the caregivers, because it does, as we've talked, it doesn't sound very appealing, mm-hmm. With all of the emotions and the losses and everything. But there are benefits. And when I talk with caregivers, most all of them don't have regrets. They're very glad for what they did. And whether that's because they felt like they were able to repay that person back for taking care of them when they were a child, when they got to care for them in return. Again, with the becoming closer and learning more about them, that can be really fun. Mm-hmm. And maybe they weren't always close, and this gives them the chance to be. There's just so many good feelings, and I think just that personal, that personal well-being feeling there that they get from being able to help somebody, mm-hmm. and to provide that quality care. Because sometimes if you hire out care, you don't know exactly, it's
you're
kind
not
of
there
because
all
you're
the time,
not there, right? And if they were right there and they were doing it, they feel like, I gave them the best quality of care that mm-hmm. I could, and it's a very good feeling that they have there.
Well, Cheri, we're all out of time. Thanks so much for coming by and talking about this
Sure.
topic and providing our viewers with some great information and advice.
Thank you for having me.
Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston. Being Well is also available online at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/WEIUTV. Just look for the Being Well playlist. Here you can view current as well as past episodes.